Welcome to this deep dive. And oh man, this is a really cool story. So today we're going to talk about how Indonesia, with over 245 million Muslims, became the nation with the largest Muslim population in the world.
Yeah.
Pretty amazing, right?
Yeah, that's huge. And the cool part is it didn't happen through force or conquest, but through trade.
Peaceful and gradual.
Exactly. It all starts with, you got to understand Indonesia's geography. We're talking about a vast archipelago. I mean, the people there, their lives were intertwined with the sea.
So sea trade, it wasn't just an option, right? It
Yeah.
was their lifeline.
Exactly. Their lifeblood. Yeah.
Okay, so we're talking about the 13th century, right?
Yeah.
This is when we start seeing all these Islamic artifacts in Indonesia. But chances are they had already encountered Islam even earlier.
Yeah, most likely. Let's rewind even further back to the Maritime Silk Road.
Okay.
Arab traders, they were the major players back then, sailing all the way from the Red Sea and the Persian Gulf to China.
Wow.
And to get there, they had to pass right through the Malacca Strait, nestled between modern-day Indonesia and Malaysia. So Indonesia was this bustling crossroads, this vibrant hub where East met West.
Exactly, precisely. And remember, this was a time when sea routes were gaining prominence, even surpassing the land-based Silk Road.
Really?
Oh yeah, for speed and efficiency, sea routes were the way to go. So these Arab traders weren't just bringing goods, they were bringing their faith and their customs to a land that was actually primed for cultural exchange.
I can almost picture it now. These bustling ports, ships overflowing with spices, gold, and silver, all being traded for Chinese silks, tea, and paper.
Yeah.
And amidst all this, a new faith is quietly taking root.
It's fascinating because a lot of these traders, they didn't just come and go. They settled down, married local Indonesians, raised families.
Wow.
So Islam wasn't spread through grand pronouncements or sweeping conquest, but through everyday interactions, personal relationships, and the gradual integration of faith into the very fabric of Indonesian society.
It's so different from the image we often have of how religions spread, especially when you compare it to the conquest we see in other parts of the world. Right. No forced conversions here. Just this organic, almost subtle embrace of a new faith.
Yeah, and it really makes you think, why was Islam so readily accepted? One key factor was its compatibility with existing Indonesian beliefs. Unlike some faiths, Islam, especially the Sufi branch, was adaptable. This allowed for a smoother integration with local traditions.
Sufism, the mystical side of Islam. Tell me more about how that played a role.
Sure. Sufi teachers traveling from the Middle East and India brought with them a gentler, a more inclusive version of Islam. They emphasized a personal connection with God, a spirituality that really resonated with the Indonesians. And, importantly, they showed respect for local customs. Islam didn't feel like an imposition, it was more like a welcoming path.
So rather than demanding a complete break from the past, Sufism offered a way to blend existing beliefs with the teachings of Islam.
Yeah.
No wonder it was so popular.
Yeah, and this personalized spiritual approach attracted both the elites and the commoners.
It wasn't about a rigid set of rules, but about nurturing a deeper, more personal connection with the divine. But we gotta remember that while Arab traders played a major role, they weren't the only ones bringing Islam to Indonesia.
Oh, right. Muslim travels from India, where Islam had flourished for centuries under the Delhi Sultanate, they also left their mark. That was around the 13th century, right?
That's it. The Delhi Sultanate, their influence was pretty widespread. Their scholars and traders helped shape the Islamic landscape of Indonesia. It just shows you how interconnected the world was even back then. And then there's, of course, the voyages of the legendary Chinese Muslim admiral Zheng He.
Zheng He. I mean, what a legendary figure. Yeah. He led these massive fleets across the Indian Ocean, reached Indonesia multiple times in the 15th century. What else did he do?
Oh, he was fascinating. A true Renaissance man. Not just an admiral and a trader, but also a diplomat, explorer, and a devout Muslim. Can you imagine the impact of his visits? His fleets, they were huge. It showcased the might of the Ming dynasty. And Zheng He himself, he was facilitating cultural and religious exchanges. All this helped spread Islamic teachings.
So by the late 15th century, we see Islam overtaking Hinduism and Buddhism as the dominant faith in Sumatra. It's amazing how quickly and peacefully the faith had spread, all through trade and cultural exchange.
Absolutely. But the story takes a bit of a turn when we shift our focus to Java. This is Indonesia's most populous island, and here Islam faced a much tougher challenge. Instead of smooth conversions, there was resistance from the ruling powers.
You're talking about the Majapahit Empire.
Yeah.
One of Southeast Asia's most powerful Hindu-Buddhist empires.
Well,
we weren't about to just give up their power without a fight.
Nope. And this clash between the old guard and the rising tide of Islam, it led to a big power struggle. The Demak Sultanate, a new Islamic kingdom, emerged to challenge them.
Led by Raden Patah. So this wasn't just about religion. It was a battle for control,
Yeah.
influence, the future of Java.
Exactly. And the Demak Sultanate, they were smart. They leveraged existing trade networks, forged alliances with these powerful merchant families. They turned economic power into political dominance.
Wow.
This fusion of economic and religious influence, it became a blueprint for other Islamic kingdoms in the region. And ultimately, they triumphed. They overthrew the Majapahit Empire in the late 15th century.
So even though Islam's arrival in Indonesia was largely peaceful, there were instances where conflict and power struggles played a role. It reminds us that history is rarely black and white.
Absolutely. And there's an interesting twist here. The defeated Hindu rulers didn't just disappear, they retreated to the island of Bali.
Which explains why Bali remains a predominantly Hindu island to this day.
Exactly.
It's like this little cultural enclave within a largely Muslim nation, a reminder of this ancient power shift. But what's even more significant is the unifying effect the rise of Islam in Java had.
Yes. Previous Hindu-Buddhist empires had struggled to create this cohesive national identity, but Islam succeeded.
Yeah.
It provided a common ground, a shared faith that transcended all these cultural and ethnic differences.
It's almost ironic, isn't it? A faith that arrived peacefully through trade ended up playing such a crucial role in shaping the political and social landscape of Indonesia.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable. But then things change again with the arrival of, well, a new power on the scene, the Dutch.
Ah, yes. The era of colonialism, the 16th century. This is when the Dutch arrive. They want to control the Spice Islands, of course.
Yeah.
They established the Dutch East India Company. And for centuries, Indonesia finds itself under their rule. How did this impact Islam in the region? So we have this backdrop of colonial tension, but the Dutch, they weren't quite like other European powers at the time.
Right. It's interesting because unlike other European colonial powers, the Dutch, they were relatively tolerant of Islam. I mean, they understood its deep roots in Indonesia, and for the most part, they didn't try to suppress it.
More of a pragmatic approach. I guess they figured disrupting the majority religion would just make it harder to control the colony.
Exactly. But let's not think it was all harmony as the Dutch gained power. There were bound to be clashes, local interests bumping up against colonial ambitions. And you know what? In those moments of resistance, guess what emerged as a rallying point for the Indonesians?
I think I can guess Islam. It gave them a sense of shared identity in the face of this outside force.
Exactly. Islam, once brought by traders and embraced peacefully, was now becoming this symbol of resistance against colonial rule. It united Indonesians from different islands, different backgrounds against this common enemy.
Which sets the stage for Islam evolving into a cornerstone of Indonesian nationalism. It's not just about personal faith anymore, right? It's about shaping the destiny of a nation.
And that's where we see the rise of movements like Muhammadiyah, founded in 1912. They wanted to modernize Indonesia through Islamic principles. They were inspired by reformers in Egypt, promoting education, healthcare, and economic growth, all within this Islamic framework.
So they weren't just fighting for independence. They were envisioning a new Indonesia, where Islam would be central to a modern progressive society, a far cry from those peaceful traders from centuries earlier. What were the reactions to this vision? Did everyone agree on what this new Indonesia should look like?
Well, it was a critical moment. You know, Islam was becoming this powerful force for social change, a catalyst for a national awakening. And of course, there were different viewpoints. Some embraced modernization within an Islamic context. They saw it as a way to uplift the nation. Others maybe held more traditional views, wary of change. You know, it's that tension you see in societies going through big transformations.
It's fascinating how this one faith could be interpreted and leveraged in so many ways. But in the end, it was this shared faith, this unity that came out of resisting colonial rule that helped pave the way for Indonesia's independence in 1945.
It really is amazing how Islam, introduced so peacefully, went through all these distinct phases from arriving through trade and exchange to spreading as rulers converted and becoming this force for social change and national identity.
And as Indonesia stepped onto the world stage as an independent nation, they were entering a world that was rapidly changing too. I imagine industrialization and globalization played a big part in the next chapter of Indonesian Islam.
Absolutely. The opening of the Suez Canal in 1869 changed everything. It shortened travel time between Europe and Asia. So it became much easier for Indonesians to make the pilgrimage to Mecca.
So this physical journey becomes easier and deepens that spiritual connection to the heart of Islam. It's amazing how a canal can impact faith and culture thousands of miles away.
It shows how connected the world was even back then, and as more Indonesians traveled to Mecca, they returned with new ideas about Islam, enriching the religious landscape even more. It wasn't just about the trip, it was about the exchange of ideas, exposure to different schools of thought within Islam, the debates that came as a result.
So Indonesian Islam, already a unique blend of influences, was now being shaped by this global interaction.
Exactly, and this exposure led to some intense debate reform movements like Wahhabism and Salafism, with their emphasis on a stricter interpretation of Islamic texts. They started to gain traction in certain segments of Indonesian society, which was a shift considering how adaptable and localized Indonesian Islam had been up to that point.
That makes sense. These movements were calling for a return to what they saw as the fundamentals of Islam. So how did that sit with existing Indonesian traditions? How did different Indonesian Muslims react to these stricter interpretations?
Well, you got to remember Indonesian Islam had always been syncretic, incorporating local customs and beliefs. So those stricter interpretations, they did spark debate. Some welcomed a pure form of Islam. Others felt it clashed with the more tolerant, flexible Islam they were used to.
It's that tension that exists in a lot of faiths, even today, tradition versus modernity navigating a changing world. So how did that play out in Indonesia? Did those stricter interpretations ultimately win out?
It's interesting, because despite the debates, Indonesian Islam has mostly kept its inclusive and syncretic nature. Yeah, there are groups who want stricter adherence to Islamic law, but the majority of Indonesian Muslims, they still practice a moderate form of Islam, one that's deeply connected to local customs and traditions. They found that balance, embracing some aspects of these movements, but holding on to the unique blend of faith and culture that's defined Indonesian Islam for centuries.
It speaks to the resilience of Indonesian Islam, that ability to adapt, to absorb new ideas, but hold on to its core values.
Yeah.
It's remarkable. It's faced challenges, colonial rule, those internal debates about the very nature of faith, and yet it's emerged as this unifying force, this cornerstone of Indonesian identity.
It's a reminder that Islam, like any religion, isn't just one thing. It's diverse and it evolves. It's shaped by people. In places in Indonesia, we see this tapestry woven from tradition, modernity, local customs, and global influences.
It's a long way from that initial spark ignited by those early traders, who could have imagined that their arrival would lead to this shaping the religious and cultural landscape of a whole nation.
It's the unpredictable nature of history. Sometimes the biggest changes come from the most ordinary things. A chance encounter, a trade route, a new idea.
It makes you wonder about the role Indonesia could play, in the broader Muslim world, given its unique history and the way Islam evolved there.
Oh, that's an interesting thought. Yeah, you see Indonesia's story, it kind of challenges the stereotypical views of Islam that we see, in the media or in politics.
Yeah.
Here's a country where Islam spread peacefully, it coexists with other faiths, it embraces modernity while honoring tradition, it makes you rethink things.
So could Indonesia be a model for interfaith dialogue and understanding? Could it be like a beacon of tolerance in a world that's becoming more and more polarized?
It definitely has the potential. I mean, Indonesia, with its huge Muslim majority, could help the world see Islam in a new light, more nuanced and inclusive. Its history shows that Islam isn't just one thing. It's diverse and dynamic. It can adapt to different cultures.
That's a powerful message, especially when Islam is so often portrayed in such a narrow way, focusing on extremism and conflict. Indonesia offers a different perspective, right? One that shows the peaceful and pluralistic side of the faith.
And that's a perspective worth hearing, Indonesia's story. It challenges us to look beyond the headlines and see the richness and diversity within the Muslim world. It reminds us that Islam, just like any faith, can be about peace, tolerance, and understanding.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I'm left with a sense of hope. I mean, Indonesia's journey, with all its ups and downs, offers some valuable lessons for us today.
Yeah, it shows us that faith can be a powerful force for unity and progress, that cultural exchange can bring us together instead of dividing us, and that history, even when it's complicated, it can be a source of hope and inspiration.
And maybe, just maybe, Indonesia, with its story and its Muslim community, can show us a way toward a more peaceful and connected world. What stands out to you most from everything we've talked about today?
For me, it's just that reminder that we need to approach the world with curiosity and an open mind to really understand a culture or a faith or even a historical event. We got to dig deeper, look beyond the surface. That's what this deep dive is all about, right?
Absolutely. It's about recognizing the complexities, the different perspectives that make up our world. It's about not oversimplifying things, not judging based on preconceived notions, and it's about finding those things that connect us. Yeah. Those shared experiences that remind us of our common humanity.
Well said, and I think Indonesia's journey is a great example of that. From those early traders to the way faith, culture, and politics shaped the nation. It's a story about human connection, the lasting impact of cultural exchange, and the potential for something new and amazing to happen when different worlds meet.
So to everyone listening, keep exploring, keep asking questions, keep diving deep into those stories that shape our world. You never know what you might find.
And until next time, stay curious.